I'm Maggie, McKay, podcaster and broadcaster, and before Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI, he was reflecting on the conclave, and this is what he had to say. I would not say that the Holy Spirit picks out the Pope, because there are too many contrary instances of popes the Holy Spirit obviously would not have picked. I would say that the Spirit does not exactly take control of the affair, but rather, like a good educator, as it were, leaves us much space, much freedom, much more elastic sense, not that he dictates the candidate for whom one must vote. Probably the only assurance he offers is that the thing cannot be totally ruined.
Hi, this is Father Tom Gibbons. I'm with Paulist Productions, and as you heard, our co-host Maggie McKay just shared a great insight about Pope Benedict on our brand new podcast, Candid Catholics. And this season is about conclaves and cardinals, and we are seeking to be one of your one-stop shop to cover all the things about the conclave and answering questions and diving into the issues and learning from a variety of voices about what this conclave means for us as Catholics, but really what it means for us in the whole world, really. So we're so glad you decided to join us today. Today we're actually going to be talking about some of the cardinals that certain news organizations, betting markets, so to speak, may be highlighting as a possible papal selection. And then we're also going to be hearing from someone who's a seminarian with the Paulist Fathers, my very own community, Andrea Ouma, who is from Kenya, has also worked as a teacher in Brazil, and also I think will bring a great international perspective on all these questions that so many of us been asking about the new pope. So how are you feeling about like this whole process, Maggie? Like
I'm learning a lot. I have to say, after, close to, I don't know, 18 years of Catholic education, really from the beginning to the end of college, I'm a little rusty. And like you said earlier when we were talking, we haven't had this for, how many years has it been since we've
Well, it's been
elected a new
13. It
pope?
was 13 years
Hmm.
for Pope Francis, and then I think it was 8 years of Pope Benedict. But
Right.
then, John Paul II, I think was 22, 20, something like that. His was a super long papacy, so I think
Right.
we didn't get as into it, so to speak. So we didn't
Right.
have that many conclaves for refuge because Pope John Paul was just keep on going.
And
So
now we have social media and we have a
right,
lot of outlets and resources to find out information.
right. Well, I see our guest Andrew has joined us all the way from Washington, D.C., fresh from studies as he prepares to become a Paulist priest. Um, Andrew, like, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and where you are in seminary and all that good stuff.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Father Tom and Maggie. I'm Andrew Nicholas. I'm in Washington, D.C., a Polish seminarian, originally from Kenya, but also lived in and worked in Brazil for 5 years. So, yeah, I have that kind of a background. Yeah.
Andrew, as a seminarian and a future priest, is there anything you're looking for in a new pope?
Absolutely. I think what really I'm looking forward to is somebody who is on fire, can I say? Who is on fire to continue the work that Pope Francis has begun. So I think the foundation is there. And to me, a person who is going to do the building, the construction, that is something that I'm really looking forward to.
So when you say like continue the work, like what kind of work would you like to see kept going?
Um, Something that comes to my mind very vivid is the work of synod and synodality. So there's that document that has just come out, and I think the implementation of that document is the work that I'm talking about. And there are very
Yeah.
many aspects of that that can resonate with me, and especially from where I come from, as somebody who is going also to be reaching out to those who are in the margins. I think that is something that we still want to see going forward.
Yeah.
Somebody who is still going to show an awareness of, for example, African continent, uh, getting exposed to that part of the world. Because as we know now, Africa is developing in terms of having many Christians. So Christianity is becoming something very popular there. So somebody who is aware of that, whether he is from Africa or not, but the knowledge of having Africa and the whole universal church in mind is something that is to be looked forward to.
And how do you see different regions in the world, especially South America, Africa, and the United States, having similar and different concerns and priorities for a new pope? Because depending upon where you live, everybody has different concerns. So, how do you see that working out?
I think you know the beauty of the church is that the church is universal, and as you said, what really matters is context. This is also where some of the thorny issues or discussions come about, and people say, "Oh, these people don't agree with us," or "These people don't agree with us." Is understanding the context. For example, when we are talking about the African context, some of the priorities there, I'm going to give a very practical example. The document Fiducia Supplicans. So the people in irregular situations, I'm giving an example of that. When you go to an African context, we will be talking of the polygamous, relationships. So
Yeah.
that will be a big concern for the people in my area. How do we then minister to them? How do we reach out to them, even though they are living outside? They are living not according to what the church teaches. When you come to the western part of the world, and that I mean the United States or the Europe, we'll be talking of same-sex marriages. That is there. So that will be defined as a group of people that are in irregular situations. And so those kind of context will define, will be very particular, and I think they should be dealt with in a very particular way. When you go to Latin America, I was there. The main concern will be reaching out to the poor. There is that kind of zeal because of the liberation theology and the theology of the people that I think Pope Francis drank from, and I think he has also exposed us to. And so, yeah.
What was your favorite quality about Pope Francis?
He was personable. So in 2015, when he was making his first trip as a pope to Africa, so he came to Kenya as his first country in Africa. Then during that time, Kenya was experiencing was in a very tough time. We had a terrorist attack. I think some people are conversant with this. There was a terrorist group that captivated a mall, a shopping mall. It's called Westgate. And for over a week, people were inside there. And so the security was not just that beefed up. And Pope Francis was coming there. So a nightmare for those who are organizing that. And so he was asked, are you worried about the security? Your security or your safety? He said, I'm more worried about the mosquitoes than than what was in the minds of people. So that kind of person that was able to take risks, was able to reach out, was able to dialogue. I think that to me is something that draws me even to the ministry of priesthood. And actually, one of the things that I also joined the Paul is because I see in them that charisma of people who are just human beings but trying to do their best.
Yeah. So how is your so where are you at in formation now? So you're in your year 2 of your theological studies, is that right? Or year 1? Where are you right now?
I'm going to year 2. So I just I'm finishing my year 1, so I'm just doing my exams this week. So
Oh,
How
God
many
bless
years?
you.
yeah.
God bless you. I remember that very, very well. I just remember So I remember towards the end of my education, it's like, you want to go on for graduate school? And I said, I do not want more graduate school. I am good. I sometimes will joke that, like, when people ask what's a Paulist father, I said it's a Paulist father is a Jesuit who doesn't want to do extra graduate school. Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Oh, good, good.
How many years does it take, Andrew?
Sorry?
How many years does it take before you're
Um,
finished?
how many years does it take for that, Tom?
Well, I know. I mean, I think the standard is for the Paulist formation. I think it takes between 6 and 7.
Yes.
Wow.
So I know for me, I had 1 year in novitiate where you're just kind of getting to know the community and they're getting to know you. Then 2 years of graduate school. Then after my second year of theology, I did what's called a pastoral year in which I worked in a parish. And then 2 more years of theology, and then you're ordained a deacon somewhere in that, and you're ordained a priest. So but however, one of the requirements in order to undergo the theological program for a Catholic priest is you have to have a certain number of credits for of philosophy. So imagining, Andrew, you had to catch up a little bit on your philosophy credits. Is that right?
No, I was lucky because I majored in philosophy, so I had.
Oh, never mind then.
Oh.
Okay.
Smart. Do you miss Kenya?
Well, I do miss Kenya. Yeah, I do. I had a chance to go back for holidays in December and to visit with the family. Yeah, but there are those moments those days that you just miss.
Yeah.
I bet. So if you were elected Pope, what would your main goal be? What would you focus on if you could just pick one thing?
Evangelization, I think. Evangelization, and that's a big umbrella. I know, but it is. I think we still need to evangelize.
And when you say evangelize, because I think like many of the people who will be listening to this podcast are not necessarily Catholic or even Christian. So like when you say evangelization, what do you mean by that, and what do we mean by that?
Yeah, in my own way of understanding it, I think the way I understand it and the way I see it is preaching the good news, in a tone and in a way and in a language that is accessible to people. So it's like exposing people to what my faith is. And that to me does not necessarily mean conquering other people to join my faith. Now, if my witness or the message that I bring forth is convincing enough that they join, well and good. But just putting that message out there, sharing my faith, to me, that is the evangelization. And it will have its own nuances like ecumenism and interreligious dialogue and all sorts of things. But to me, that is the foundation of it. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So, well, Andrew, I know you're in the middle of studies. We see all these books behind you and a piles of books. God bless you for reading all those books, and
Good luck.
yeah, and thanks so much for your perspective, because I think one of the reasons we're really excited to talk to you today is because you are, you bring a lot of different perspectives, and I think we all tend to just, of course, many of the people coming up to me will say, like, here's my list, and of course, because coming from an American culture, we have our own set of priorities, and I think it's really great, even you sharing when we talk about irregular marriages and some of the work that Pope Francis did, and bringing that into the synod, into that conversation that everybody is to have within the church. I never thought about the issue of polygamy that you brought up. That would be that would be a concern for many African countries as something to be worked through, and how do we still embrace one another and talk with one another. So.
Right.
That's all really great, and we're really excited that you're with us. So keep on plugging along.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye.
I'll see you at the ordinations next week.
Is it? Oh, that's very soon. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Next week.
Yeah, we've got some great seminarians, and I think it was really
Great.
great just to kind of like hear from just kind of hear from people who are just in the middle of going through the process of becoming priests nowadays. We keep on talking about there's a shortage of priests, and
Right.
at least here in the United States anyway, that's become a really big concern for us. I think and one of the big concerns that I continually hear, I continually feel,
Definitely.
I think I'm going to have a day off, and then I get a call from another church saying, "Hey, we need someone to cover
Right.
mass."
Well, I remember, usually I see at St. Paul's, and one Sunday we were there at St. Martin's, where I grew up. And there
Yep.
you were saying mass. And I thought, wow, he's busy. He's all over the place.
Yeah. No, well, the thing is, because one of the blessings of St. Paul's is because it's run by a religious community. There's a lot of priests who live there. So what I do on my weekends, it's like St. Paul's doesn't necessarily need any priests to cover mass. I mean, they ever do. I help out,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other parishes around where we live that are just one priest parishes. So at St. Martin de Tours, the parish next to ours in Los Angeles, it's just one priest and he's got 5 Sunday masses,
Wow.
and that's
Yeah.
a lot. So it's like,
Right.
okay, well, I can go and help out, and I'll help out in Baldwin Hills, a Transfiguration parish sometimes,
That's
and
great.
yeah, it's
So,
I kind of, it's like I'm a relief pitcher. I feel a
yeah,
little bit like a relief.
exactly. I was happy to see you there. It was a nice surprise.
Yeah, no, and I
Um,
saw your son there one time too. He came
oh,
up to
yeah.
me afterwards. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't used to seeing him in that context, so it took me like a
Right.
second to.
Yeah. He said, I saw Father Tom. I said, oh, I thought you went to St. Martin's. He said, I did. But
Yeah,
we should maybe break down the Cardinals.
sure,
Okay.
sure.
So who are we going to start with?
The Cardinals all have different personalities, and as we heard from Andrew, come from different parts of the world, and then they'll
Right.
have different focuses and different
Mhm.
ways in which they hold on to the faith, and different priorities, and so
And I
they're
keep
in a
hearing that it's usually not the favorite. Usually the people everybody think is going to get it doesn't. Is
it,
that
it,
what
it,
you
it
know?
it can go back and forth. Yeah, the old tagline is if you walk into a conclave as the Pope, you will walk out as a cardinal. So if
Yeah,
you're the favorite going in, it
right.
might not be you.
Hmm.
So which could be a relief or not. I mean, the funny thing is, I think Pope Benedict, you read Joseph Ratzinger's quote.
Hmm.
Pope Benedict, because he was very close with John Paul II and had held a lot of positions in the Vatican, I think he was somebody who many people expected would succeed John Paul II, and he did as Pope
Hmm.
Benedict. However, Mario Bergoglio, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, who became Pope Francis, was on nobody's Final Four bracket. Like it
Even
was,
his own. He thought he was going to go back home. He
yeah,
thought he had
no,
a
I mean
round trip ticket.
he had a round trip ticket. Yeah, no, I mean he had a round trip ticket, and I mean as we talked in a previous episode, when he got on that plane to go to Rome for the conclave, he did not know that he was never going to return back to his homeland of Argentina.
That is a little sad though that he never got to go back.
I always felt that way too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he got to travel so many places, and
right. But
I know there was, and I think that's one of the things. It's also reflective of one of the things about, the Pope is an interesting animal, so to speak, or the papacy is an interesting animal because it's both a spiritual position, a position of spiritual life, but it's also a political one because
Mhm.
the Vatican is its own country. The Vatican is the smallest country in the world. So the
Wow.
Vatican is a head of state. So you will hear, when there's a new president, they will say, well, who is going to be the ambassador to the Vatican? Because the Vatican is its own state.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
if you become the Bishop of Rome, and within the Diocese of Rome is this small little place called the Vatican, you are, you are a head of state.
Yeah.
You are online with the President of the United States, or wherever the head, of someone else. It's the
Right.
Pope was considered his own royalty, and there's a lot of history that goes into that we can get into at another time, because I think one of the reasons for that over history was the idea that they wanted the church to kind of have its own moral authority and not be subject to the whims of an outside ruler.
Hmm.
So not have a king say, all right, this is the way I want things. And, they wanted to kind of like have that stronghold of independence. So
Right.
That's the super quick reason, but there's that's another podcasting series, I think, for that.
I'm hearing a lot about this cardinal from the Philippines, so I don't want to butcher his name. So how do you pronounce it?
Cardinal Tagle.
Tagle.
Cardinal
I love
Tagle.
his nickname, Cheeto.
Yes. Yes. And I mean I think many people have called him the Asian Francis. He is very concerned very concerned about the poor.
Right.
Has a strong emphasis on that. He's got a lot of energy. Every time you see him with a smile on his face, and there's a lot of footage of him doing karaoke,
Yep.
which I think is a new development in Vatican history. Like, we're not really used to seeing our cardinals doing karaoke, but
No.
it's one of those things that I think people really respond to him, and that makes him accessible. And I know him and Pope Francis were very, very close.
He
And
has criticized the church, though, right?
what was that?
He has criticized the church, though, for using harsh words.
Yeah, no, and I
No.
think, and it's one of those things in the space of authenticity. Like, he has been, like he said, that sometimes for people in LGBTQ situations, it's like a lot of times the language from officials in the church has been overly harsh, and he's not somebody who necessarily is looking to change, like Pope Francis. Like, he's not someone who would necessarily be looking to change doctrine on that, but just saying, look, how do we go about treating our brothers and sisters, and how do we challenge one another to learn more and to listen more, and to be part. I know this is a new word for everybody. The Synod on Synodality. It's
Yes.
a mouthful.
Say
I
it
get
again,
that.
what it is.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's basically what Pope Francis started was, I think many of us are probably familiar with the idea of Catholicism being pray, pay, and obey. Your job is to show up to church on Sunday morning, and pray, put your money in the collection basket, and then whatever we tell you to do, that's what you believe. And as we've entered more into the modern world, we realize how complicated people's lives are, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that the teachings of the church are necessarily wrong. It may mean that certain teachings were developed in one time period, and now we have new understandings. And how do we evaluate that in a spirit of faith, not in a spirit of convenience, but like in a spirit of good faith, And the only way we know how the Holy Spirit, because like, as you read in the beginning, like, we believe that the Holy Spirit is working through the conclave. The Holy Spirit is working amongst the cardinals. But you know what? We also believe that the Holy Spirit is working within the congregations, with the lay people, with the priests, with
Right.
individual churches. And the Holy Spirit is working in very different ways. And if we're not listening to one another, so in many ways, I'd probably just say it's a ministry of listening. It doesn't necessarily change any of the governmental structures, but it does mean that, schooling is important. I mean, I was kind of joking a little bit before about, studying theology, but it's important that we know that we have good structures. But
Right.
at the same time, we also have to have a better understanding of how do we apply those in the world, and if we're not listening to one another, and that means and listening is a two-way street. So it's like, if somebody is listening to me and my concerns, in any walk of life, I typically find that I'm more open to listening to what their concerns are.
Definitely.
So it really is meant to be a two-way street, because sometimes I think people feel like, I haven't been listened to, so now I'm going to scream, and then the walls continue up. It really is meant to be dialogue and growth.
Right.
And I think that's the process that Pope Francis has started. And I think those who had kind of come from a more rigid's maybe a hard word, but kind of maybe more of a top-down theology, philosophy.
Old school?
What?
Old
It
school?
could be old school. Yeah, very old school. And I mean, it's been old school for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
our American democratic experiment is still very new in world history when we look back thousands and thousands of years.
Mhm.
So, and so if like those who would just kind of say, well, I know more than you, so do this. And in many cases, people in leadership do know more. I mean, it's not that they're coming out of nowhere, but at the same time, if there's not listening to how, but at the end of the day, we do believe that we are all church together. Like the church is not just clergy and we're the special, we're the special people and we give our
Right.
graces to everybody else. I think that, and I think we've seen by many of the scandals that have come to light in the last 20 to 30 years have kind of really knocked us off our pedestal on
Hmm.
that way. And
Right.
just to kind of say, look, we need to be talking with one another, not at one another. And I think so. The Synod on Synodality is local churches, including our church at St. Paul's, would get
Mhm.
together and say, hey, what are our concerns? What are our concerns about the whole church?
Yeah.
I have a gay child. Can he go to church? I'm divorced, but I'm a faithful Catholic. What do I do?
Right.
I have this concern, or my kids don't go to church anymore. What do I do? Like, whoa, there's
Yeah.
all these kind of concerns that people have,
Hmm.
and they're not happening in a vacuum. And then they get kicked up to those concerns, or then lifted up to the diocesan level, and the bishop has the opportunity to kind of listen to those concerns from his immediate flock, and then those concerns are brought to Rome, and then representatives are meant to be in dialogue. It's like, this is what we're hearing,
Right.
and
Yeah.
whatever those concerns are, like just even listening to Andrew right now, there are a couple of things that I just never would have thought on my
Right.
own without listening to Andrew would be concerns of different parts of the world. So
Exactly. We have a few firsts this time around in this conclave, like the first cardinal from Jerusalem,
yes,
Cardinal Pizzabella. Is that how you say it?
Pizzaballa, yes,
Pizzaballa. Okay.
which means I was told it means pizza dance. I think Arias
No,
Bala
really?
is that, yeah. Well, I don't know. Another Pauline sister of mine, Sister Nancy Elselman, she was talking about yeah, it's kind of like a half joke. So I wish Sister Bernadette were still here because I don't believe there's a specific rule that
Mm.
you have to pick another name if you're elected
Mm.
Pope.
Oh,
I don't believe that. I
okay.
think, you
That's
can just, what
interesting.
name do you choose?
Hmm.
You can choose your own name. And
Okay.
I've just been saying, and as I've kind of like done a little research on Cardinal Pizzaballa, I mean, the work he's done in Jerusalem, particularly with the war in Gaza, trying to bring peace, offering to, at one point, he offered to the people who took some of the Israeli hostages that he would offer himself as a hostage in
Wow.
exchange. I
Wow.
mean, and he said, oh, it was just obvious that I would do that.
Oh my gosh. And he's one of
Um,
the younger ones. He's only 60.
He's only 60, so he's very young. He
Mhm.
is from Italy, and I think that's another question going into the conclave is for centuries the Pope was always from Italy.
Right.
Pope was just always from Italy. And I know we talked a little bit about the possibility of a French Pope and all that, but Pope was always from it. They kind of felt like they had the inside game, so to speak, on it.
Hmm.
But our last three popes have not been from Italy. So Pope Francis, of course, was the first pope from the Western Hemisphere.
Hmm.
And it was funny when Pope John Paul II was elected. It was just like they're in Italy and they went all the way to Poland, which is like 4 hours away, and then like for when Pope Benedict was elected after John Paul II, they went all the way to Germany, which wasn't that far away either. So the question is, are the Italians getting a little restless and saying, we want it back,
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Speaking of, what about Cardinal Perlin?
Perlin, yes. Well, I mean, in many ways, I chuckle when I see the betting markets because, again, nobody knows anything. Nobody knows anything,
Right.
But many people are looking at the fact that he's Secretary of State right now as somebody who knows the functioning. A lot of times we have these like hopes for what we want the Pope to be. Like we want the Pope to be a great communicator and speak multiple language and have a heart for this. And those are all really important things. But then there's also the part of the job that's actually running the Vatican,
Right.
and he has a lot of experience in that. And of course his diplomatic service included like traveling a lot, going to Nigeria, Mexico, and Venezuela. So, he has that world experience as well. He's also from Italy. So, he is, and he is, from what I understand, like open to kind of keeping this synod on synodality going. And I think that's it's one of the central questions that many, that even though it may not be like what's immediately talked about, it's kind of one of the big underlying inside baseball questions that a lot of people have. And so, he's, and one of the interesting things is, one of the things I get asked a lot is, should priests get married? And he's open to having that conversation,
That's
as
good.
kind of when we talk about the shortage of priests or whatever.
Right.
I always say, I think, there could be a lot of blessings that would come out of that. There would be some struggles that would come out of that too. Like, there's no panacea or magic wand, but the fact that he's interested in having that conversation doesn't mean he's in favor of it. Just means he's open to the conversation.
Yeah.
I think is kind of exciting. What I was going to say when I was talking about papal names, my secret hope is that if Cardinal Pizzabella gets elected, is that he keeps his name. So he's Pope Pizzabella. I just think
Agreed.
that would be fantastic.
It is a great name.
That would be, that would
Especially
be
for
a
a
great
pope.
name. Somebody, when I said that to someone, they said, or he could name himself Pope John and then he'd be Papa John's. I'm like, I think either way would be great.
I keep seeing this issue that I never would have thought would be in the top of mind issues. I keep seeing it when I'm reading about the different candidates, how they feel on euthanasia. I didn't know that
Yeah.
was a consideration, I guess. But I haven't seen any that have said they're for it. Have you?
No, I haven't. No. And I think it's that sense of, Catholic theology is always about care of the person, care of human life, all human life. And what the theology, I would be surprised if there were any contenders who would speak more favorably on euthanasia.
Right. Same with
Because
abortion.
if the theology is talking about life as a special gift from God, and even the suffering can have some grace, and I know some people may disagree with that,
Right.
but
Right.
if there's grace in suffering, then like, who would it be for anybody to cut that short?
Right.
Now at what point of course the question is, at what point is that sadistic or, but I definitely understand that. But like the theology is not to interrupt what God, comfort, yes, but not necessarily to speed along or take, matters into our own hands, so to speak. So I think
Oh,
that's where that theology would be coming from. So I would be very, very surprised if there was any Cardinals. Maybe there are. I don't know, but
oh.
that would be in favor of that.
Same with abortion and contraception, probably.
Yeah, contraception. I think there might be some Cardinals who might be a little bit more, might be willing to embrace more subtlety. I can't speak to that
Right.
off the top of my head, but I think for abortion, it always comes back to, it always comes back to, yes, we absolutely need to be concerned about the safety of women, about the rights of women. Those are things we always need to be concerned about. And we also need to be concerned about vulnerable life, that the unborn.
Right.
And so, and we know in our modern society, that's really difficult to navigate sometimes. And it can often sound as if women's issues and women's situations are being dismissed. But it's but I think abortion, I think that would be pretty consistent across the Cardinals,
Right.
holding on to that basic Catholic teaching of the sanctity of all life. And of course, when we say the sanctity of all life, we don't, sometimes some people can just get focused on before, I've seen people complain. Sometimes some Catholics can come off. It's like they only care about, life before it's born, but then after it's born, they don't care. It's like, no, we care all the way through,
Right.
but I think that's, but I don't think I'd see a cardinal having, having a different view on abortion than what's been said in the past.
So, Father Tom, do you think it's possible that we could have an American Pope? Because a lot of people are talking about Cardinal Prevost. Is that how you say it, from Chicago?
I think that's how you say it. I think it's a good question. Yeah. Because obviously we've, the last, maybe, I don't want to say even 600 years, we've only had Italian popes, except for the last three. And it was a big deal when it was kind of a big deal when John Paul II got elected.
Right.
Because he was from all the way from Poland, which is like, it's a day car ride to Poland from Italy. I mean, it's not like, and then, oh my goodness gracious, then Germany. But it was still kind of a big deal because they'd never done it before. Like, we're people of tradition, and we owe it a lot of, I think one of the great things about Catholics is, when we want to know what to do, we usually say, well, what did we do before? But, but there are times when doing something new is kind of mind blowing. And the fact that we got a pope from Poland was kind of mind blowing at first. And then, outside. We're going outside of Italy now. Oh, we're going to Germany. Okay. And then when Francis was elected all the way to South America, like, oh my goodness gracious. So of course, we in here in the land of the free and the home of the brave, are asking the question, might we get a pope? Maybe there would be pope from where we are. I've been talking to a couple people in Italy, and what I've heard from them is that I think the polite way of putting it is that the American brand is not particularly strong in Italy right now.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at that for valid or invalid reasons. We don't have a strong brand.
Yeah.
And so, and there's always been a little like, who are you upstart Americans attitude in Italy? There's always been a little bit of that. And there's a lot of that. There seems to be a lot of that right now. So, I was talking with a friend of mine a Paulist friend of mine who works in Italy, and somebody said, what about an American Pope? And he just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed.
Oh, yeah. We're not thinking he's a front runner.
Yeah, no.
Probably.
But if there were to be an American Pope, if there were on this conclave, not saying it will never ever happen,
right,
but we're just talking about this conclave.
At this time in history.
Of course.
Okay.
A name that's been surfaced is Cardinal Prevost. And maybe for some of the reasons that we just talked about, because Cardinal Prevost was born in Chicago. And he became an Augustinian. But the interesting thing about Cardinal Prevost is he's the American who has not spent a lot of time in America. So he did a lot of his work as a priest was spent doing mission work in Peru. And so much so that he was a parish pastor. He worked for the diocese in Peru. He eventually became a bishop in Peru.
Wow.
And so in some ways he has that like South American, it brings a very South American perspective, especially from someone from Chicago. So
exactly. Wouldn't expect that. Well,
yeah, we went, but not only that is he eventually got to work for the Vatican, and Pope Francis gave him a very, very high position at the Vatican. I think it's the dicastery for bishops. So he's one of the people in charge of putting the names forward who get selected as bishops. So he speaks multiple languages. We've talked about that as a very helpful job description. Do you speak multiple languages? Do you prefer deep dish or thin crust pizza? We know where he stands on that. Although that would probably strike him against the Italians because they definitely prefer more thin crust. They're not they wouldn't identify with the deep dish as much. But I think, when we talk about all of that, we've talked about many times that the cardinals many of the cardinals are only getting to know each other right now, and they're still kind of meeting each other.
Yeah.
Well, if Cardinal Prevost has been working in the dicastery of bishops, he knows a lot of them, and they know him.
True.
So
That's a good point.
if there is a dark horse, so to speak, for Pope, but definitely a dark horse American, I think it could be him. I know many people know Cardinal Dolan from New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan. And very, very popular here in the States. And I remember, I think it was 13 years ago, there were many people who were talking about he was Papal, his quote when he was asked during this conclave, and he said, "I have more of a chance of starting for the New York Yankees this season than I do have in being named Pope." So
at least he's humble.
he's very humble, or he's looking at the Yankee lineup right now and thinking he can do some help. But the Yankees are doing well, so I think he was speaking more from a place of humility than of baseball aspiration.
Right.
So I think he would be. So I think if there was, Prevost is someone to kind of watch out for. I think he's got a very interesting background.
Okay. So in Africa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Catholic Church continues to add millions of members.
Yes.
So the next pope could be from Africa. And name a lot of people are talking about is Cardinal Ambongo Besungu. I'm sure I butchered that.
I know, but I think it's Besungu.
Besungu. Okay.
But
so what's his
that may be incorrect as well.
It's as close as where I come, but
yeah.
What's his story?
Yeah, and he's from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is. Let me see. I'm sure we'll have to edit out these.
Pope Benedict named him apostolic administrator.
Apostolic administrator, right? And I think one thing we have to keep in mind is if Cardinal Ambongo would be selected as Pope, he would not be the first African Pope, but he would be the first sub-Saharan Pope. So again, we look at a map and we see we see where Italy is, and Italy is not that far away from Africa. You just go across the ocean, and Africa's right there. Right. So Saint Augustine, famously Bishop of Hippo, which is northern Africa. And so, not that Augustine became Pope, but just to say that there's a strong church tradition there and Catholic tradition. But when we talk about a first African Pope, he would be the first Black Pope and the first sub-Saharan African Pope. So, and that would be, he's been very strong on the environment, like Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which in many ways, and I think it's important to say, was also a continuation from Pope Benedict's concern for what was happening to the environment from man-made causes. So it didn't originate with Pope Francis. It goes back even further than that.
There's a quote from him. What do you think about this? He said, let Protestants be Protestants and Muslims be Muslims. We're going to work with them, but everyone has to keep their own identity. What's he trying to say?
I think, in many ways, and I think we heard that a little bit from Yevgeny on our episode about Pope Francis of tolerance. It's I think over the centuries, Christians have sometimes gotten a little bit of a bad rap. We've many times earned that bad rap of we're so excited about how awesome we think our faith is that everybody should be part of our faith, whether they like it or not,
Right.
And, we always want to invite people into the church, but it's an invitation. It's an invitation, but, it's not meant to be coercion. And I think, so many different areas of the world have just a really long, tragic history of overzealous people trying to not share the faith but enforce the faith, and not even coming from a place of genuine spirituality, but of this place of conquering and all that. And so how are we going to live together in different within different Christian traditions, and then also different religious traditions, and I think a statement like that really reflects, I think, something Pope Francis was trying to continue, but really Pope Benedict and John Paul II were continuing. That was really established by the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s, of that embrace and respect for all the ways that God communicates with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, to share what we have, and to be happy and faithful about sharing that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that has to be a put down of others, or that others need to be conquered. And of course, we
Right.
know there's lots of history over the centuries about that.
He also has been pretty outspoken about same-sex marriage. He said, unions of persons of the same sex are considered contradictory to cultural norms and intrinsically evil.
Mm.
It's a pretty strong.
Yeah, that'd be very strong language. I think, and I think when we were hearing from Andrew, I think, this is an example of different cultures having different priorities.
Right.
So Andrew was talking about when Africans would hear about the need to address irregular marriages, he was talking about, polygamy being a major issue, or
Right.
that wouldn't necessarily be an issue we would think about in the States,
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone's going to be coming from their own cultural context. Of course, over the last debatably 50 or 60 years, especially over the last couple of decades, we've been having a lot of conversation in our North American culture about the place and the role of LGBTQ persons in our society, in our countries. And that's I'm painting with really broad brushes, so I certainly don't want to overlap what anybody else what people would say about that. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not an active conversation in many, if not most, if not all, the conversations of Africa. And I mean, and I'm sure, I'm not to say that nobody's talking about it, that it's not an issue.
Right.
I'm just saying that, like, when the concerns are lifted up, those tend not to be the concerns that they would be for like a North American church member.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see who is Pope in the end. And then we'll have to break down all the things we learned about that person, right?
Yeah.
Right
And
now, we just have like little paragraphs here and there that are out there about people. But I guess when he becomes Pope, we'll know everything.
And it's funny, because we keep on talking about like the presidential contest that we do every 4 years, where it's like by the time November rolls around, it's like, oh,
Right.
we know the date that they had their wisdom teeth removed. You're like,
Exactly.
oh,
But this has
geez.
been pretty fast, relatively. So
Yeah, this is pretty fast, and we almost get to know the person afterwards. And I think, especially in our, social media culture, our news culture, I think the one thing, that I think every pope would agree with, and I know Pope Francis, when they talk about his relatability, and that I think everybody would have said, John Paul II would have said this, and Pope Benedict would have said this. They may have already said this, and the quote's just not coming to mind. But when someone asked Pope Francis, "Who are you?" he said, "I'm a sinner."
Right.
It's so, like, whoever gets chosen is not going to be perfect.
Right.
There are going to be mistakes that he made and shortcomings and things he does amazing and things he just doesn't come that naturally to him.
Right.
And
Big job.
What?
It's a big job.
It's a huge job.
Everything
Yeah.
gotta be so
We were talking earlier, John Allen wrote this book, All the Pope's Men, and he said, the job of Pope is so big that not one person can do it all. And, and then there's just, everybody has their own projection of what a perfect Pope looks like.
Mhm.
And so I think my prayer going into this, and we just named 5 names. I mean, this is 5 out of 133. And,
Exactly.
we might do another episode with more names. We'll see. But,
Right.
it's a, they're like, nobody's going to do every one thing. And it's like, can we just be open to who we're given,
Mhm.
and pursue that in a spirituality? It doesn't mean that we don't have perspectives on things. It doesn't mean that we may not see things eye to eye. And that's not what we're talking about,
Mhm.
but, can we show each other deferation and grace? If the person kind of falls short in some ways,
Good point.
it was it was a big adjustment for many people who were used to the John Paul pontificate. And the Benedict pontificate, like, Benedict brought different skills, but it was kind of like a similar emphasis,
Mhm.
in their pontificates. But when Francis came along, many of the people who had been, born and raised in those pontificates had to really make some adjustments as to like who the new pope is. And wait a minute, he's talking in a very different way than the previous. He didn't change any doctrine, but he had very different focuses. There's no question about that. And our new pope is going to have some areas in what he's by definition going to be different from Francis,
For sure.
And so what kind of
accept him.
Was that? Yeah, except for shortcomings.
Everything.
And yeah, for everything. And maybe not, we Catholics, we love to project sainthood onto people, and just to kind of say, let's just let him be Pope and do the best he can.
Right.
And doesn't mean we don't have questions, doesn't mean there's no back and forth. That's part of our faith, and that's part of synodality, which is why so many people are saying they hope that continues. Because I think that's really I think Pope Francis would say that's an exciting and life-giving process. But
is that a Latin word?
What? Synodality or synod. So like a synod is a gathering of bishops, and synodality is we're all gathering together to have these conversations.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
Maybe that's the maybe that's the elevator pitch word, because we're still looking. We need the bumper sticker.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see who gets chosen in the end.
I think what I'm curious about right now is a couple of other people. I think Evgeny also said this off camera, but I'm curious how long the conclave is going to take. And he said something interesting where he said if it's a short conclave, then there's kind of a consensus of where the church is heading. If it's a longer conclave, then consensus on where the church is going is harder to reach. So I think right now I'm curious as to how long it's going to go. Is it going to be short or is it going to be long? Not 3 years long. We're not doing that.
No.
But, if it goes, I don't think it'll go into day 5, but if it does, things are afoot. So strap in or buckle up and stay tuned,
Exactly.
Yeah, well, this has been great. I mean, we're going to keep it on. And we have some future episodes coming up. We'll probably talk about a couple more Cardinals, and then
great.
Yeah, and then we're also going to be looking at some questions from a lot of Catholics have questions, but you know what? They're not the only ones who have questions. There's a lot of people from other faith traditions who have questions about this, and some of them are really interesting and stuff I never would have thought of. So
exactly.
I'm looking forward to this whole thing continuing.
Yeah, same here.